You people don't belong in places like this. Be grateful for the crumbs you get. Those words, laced with venom and privilege, were whispered by a man in a suit worth more than a year of wages for the woman he aimed them at. But what he didn't know was, he wasn't just speaking into the air. Every syllable was being recorded. Every insult, every threat. And what followed would flip the entire power dynamic on its head. This is not just a story about money, or power. It's a black story about dignity, honesty, and how a child's innocent gesture set off a chain reaction that would shake the foundations of an entire company. It started on a Friday night, inside a $1 million penthouse in Atlanta. The lights were low. The air was quiet. A billionaire named Samuel Carter sat perfectly still in a handcrafted Italian leather chair, pretending to be asleep. Across the room, a wall-mounted safe stood wide open, bursting with neatly stacked bands of $100 bills. Over $1 million, just sitting there in plain sight. He wasn't careless. It was a test. A trap. He had lost faith in people. After a trusted business partner stole 7 figures, Samuel became cold, calculating. So he crafted a cruel experiment. Let a child, just 7 years old, black, from a single-mother household, walk into a room where temptation whispered from every corner. And see what happens. What happened froze him. But before we get to that moment, I want you to take a breath. Because this story goes deeper than you'd expect. It's not about crime. It's about character. If you believe in stories that reveal the power of quiet strength, stories where justice rises from the most unlikely voices, then stay with us. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a black story rooted in truth. And the truth is, sometimes the smallest hands carry the weight of the greatest lessons. The heavy silence inside the room was broken only by the faint clicking of polished shoes. Little Elijah Brown, 7 years old, walked in with a quiet confidence that didn't match his age. His mother, Marissa, had gone off to the adjoining study to organize some files. That left Elijah alone, just a few feet from the open safe that held more money than his family had ever seen in their lifetime. He looked around cautiously, then took a slow step toward the safe. Samuel, eyes barely cracked open beneath thick lashes, stayed frozen in his chair, watching the boy's every move. He was expecting the worst. In his mind, it was only a matter of time before the kid reached for a stack of bills, maybe even tucked one away, curious or tempted like any child might be. But that's not what happened. Elijah stood in front of the safe, hands folded. He tilted his head like he was observing a puzzle that needed solving. Then, he did something no one in Samuel's world would have predicted. He dropped to his knees, carefully gathered a few loose bills that had fallen out, and began organizing them. Not stuffing them in his pockets. Not hiding them behind furniture. No, he was stacking them. By denomination. 5s with 5s. 10s with 10s. Hundreds aligned like soldiers in a perfect row. His small fingers worked slowly but deliberately, treating each bill with the kind of gentle precision a museum curator would use to handle ancient artifacts. When he was done, he even straightened the edges and centered the stack. Then, he whispered, mostly to himself, "Mom always says if it's not ours, we leave it better than we found it." Samuel felt a tightness rise in his throat. Elijah didn't know he was being watched. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just doing what he'd been taught, the kind of simple, solid value that doesn't come with privilege, but from character. And in that quiet moment, Samuel Carter realized something. All his money, all his power, all his experience had failed to teach him the one thing Elijah's mother had given her son without a dollar to her name: integrity. And that realization shook him to the core. Marissa Brown never planned to work nights cleaning offices while her son sat quietly beside her with a coloring book and a juice box. She once had different dreams. Bigger ones. She was supposed to be a teacher. At 19, she had been on a full academic scholarship to Howard University. The first in her family to even step foot on a college campus. Her major was education, and her plan was to teach inner-city youth, kids who looked like her, talked like her, and needed someone to believe in them. But life had other plans. Marissa got pregnant in her sophomore year. The father, a charming young man with promises and ambition, disappeared before the first ultrasound. Family support was minimal. Her mother had passed when she was 12, and her father had never been in the picture. She was on her own. She made the difficult choice to leave school and keep the baby. She named him Elijah. At first, she tried to juggle part-time classes and part-time work, but diapers and rent don't wait. Eventually, she gave up her degree and focused on survival. Marissa cleaned homes during the day, worked at a fast food drive-thru in the evening, and took janitorial contracts overnight. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fair. But it was honest. She refused government assistance, not out of pride, but out of principle. She didn't want Elijah to grow up thinking help came only from handouts. She wanted him to see that work, no matter how small or thankless, was a form of dignity. And every single night, before they left for a shift, she'd sit Elijah down and say the same words. You do not steal. You do not lie. And you do not let anyone tell you that you're less than them just because they wear a nicer suit. Marissa taught him to read before he was 4, using old library books she borrowed and returned religiously. She turned laundry folding into math lessons, and bedtime stories into history class. She couldn't buy him the latest sneakers or fancy electronics, but she gave him something better. A moral compass. A sense of self. A core of quiet strength. That's why, when Elijah saw that money, he didn't flinch. He didn't steal. He organized it. Because behind that small boy was a woman who had lost everything, and still chose to build something better. Gregory Blake didn't knock when he entered the executive lounge. He never did. People like him didn't ask for permission, they expected space to be cleared when they walked in. At 48, Gregory had carved his way to the top of Carter Enterprises not through innovation or integrity, but through politics and pedigree. His father had been a longtime friend of one of the board members, and that legacy shielded him like a bulletproof vest. He was known around the office for being old school, which was just a polite way of saying cold, arrogant, and unapologetically biased. Samuel Carter had invited him to a strategy meeting that morning, hoping to discuss internal restructuring. But Gregory had other concerns. I heard we've bumped pay for the night crew, Gregory said with a smug grin as he poured himself a black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just like his empathy. Samuel didn't look up from his laptop. I make adjustments based on performance. Is there an issue? Gregory let out a short laugh. Performance? You mean the single black woman with the kid who roams the halls like he owns the place? Samuel's fingers froze over the keyboard. Greg, he said slowly, Marissa is one of the most consistent employees in this building. And her son behaves better than most executives I know. Gregory leaned in, voice low and laced with mockery. You're playing a dangerous game, Sam. Give people like that an inch, and soon they'll be asking for a board seat. This isn't a charity. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. What Gregory didn't know was that Samuel had already started recording every meeting. A new security upgrade, ironically one that Gregory himself had approved, captured every word in crystal clarity. The worst was yet to come. Gregory continued, now more amused than cautious. I mean, come on. Bringing a kid into a corporate setting? What kind of parent does that? No family structure. No boundaries. No class. Samuel closed the laptop softly, looked Gregory in the eye, and spoke just one sentence. That kid has more class than you ever will. Gregory chuckled, unaware that he had just opened the first chapter of a downfall years in the making, and the cameras caught every single word. That night, Samuel Carter didn't sleep. The words Gregory Blake had thrown around so carelessly weren't just offensive. They were revealing, not of a single moment of bias, but of something larger, something systemic. Samuel had spent years building his company into a powerhouse of efficiency, but now he realized that behind the polished glass and glossy mission statements, there might be cracks in the foundation, cracks no one dared to speak of. He called in Daniel Cho, the head of IT, early the next morning. I want access to every performance review, HR complaint, and exit interview from the past 5 years, Samuel said. And I want you to pull security footage from any interaction involving Gregory Blake and our night shift teams. Daniel blinked. Sir, that's a lot of data. Samuel's voice was calm but cold. Then start now. For the next 3 nights, Samuel combed through files like a detective solving a cold case. Patterns began to emerge. They weren't obvious at first, just whispers in the data, but soon they became undeniable. Nearly every employee of color who had worked under Gregory's management had either quit or been quietly pushed out. In their exit interviews, phrases like hostile environment, lack of respect, and subtle intimidation appeared repeatedly. A few had filed formal complaints, but none had gone anywhere. HR had marked them as inconclusive or resolved through verbal warning. There were no real investigations, no follow-ups, just silence. Then came the performance evaluations, glowing reviews downgraded to meets expectations without explanation, bonuses withheld, promotion recommendations overridden, always with just enough plausible deniability to avoid suspicion. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes burning from lack of sleep, but his mind sharper than ever. He realized it wasn't just Gregory. It was the culture that had allowed someone like Gregory to operate unchecked for years. And worse, it had happened under his own watch. For a man who once prided himself on fairness and control, the truth cut deep. He reached for his phone and dialed a name he hadn't called in years. Tiffany Jenkins, he said when the line picked up. I need your expertise. This company has a cancer, and I want it gone, root and all. Tiffany, a civil rights attorney with a track record for exposing corporate discrimination, replied without hesitation. Then let's shine some light where they thought no one would ever look. The underground parking garage of Carter Enterprises was always quiet after sunset. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed above as shadows stretched long across the concrete. It was here that Gregory Blake chose to make his move. Marissa had just clocked in for her night shift. Elijah, dressed in his usual hoodie and sneakers, clutched his worn-out workbook and held tight to his mother's hand. They walked toward the employee entrance like they had every night for the past year. But this night was different. Gregory stepped out from behind a parked luxury sedan, his arms crossed, expression cold. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Mrs. Brown, he said, voice echoing against the concrete walls. We need to talk. Marissa instinctively positioned herself slightly in front of Elijah. Yes, Mr. Blake. Gregory took a slow step forward. This little routine of yours, running your kid into the building, earning raises you don't deserve, it ends tonight. Marissa stiffened. Sir, I've always followed protocol. Elijah never interferes with work. Gregory smirked. Doesn't matter. Perception is everything. And to be blunt, you're not the kind of employee we want on display. Understand. Elijah's hand squeezed hers tighter. Marissa's voice didn't shake, though her heart pounded. I'm just here to work, sir. Nothing more. Gregory's smile vanished. I'm warning you, Marissa. Keep showing up like this and things might start disappearing from offices. A missing laptop here, a lost watch there. You know how fast accusations fly, especially toward people who already look suspicious. Elijah looked up, confused and scared. Mommy, why is he talking like that? Gregory snapped. Quiet, boy. This is grown-up business. Marissa kneeled and looked Elijah in the eyes. Sweetheart, remember what I told you? Some people try to scare others because they're afraid inside. You don't ever let that fear become yours. Then she stood, facing Gregory with calm defiance. You can't intimidate me, she said. I've worked too hard to be broken by a man like you. Gregory leaned in, just inches from her face. Everyone has a breaking point. We'll see where yours is. What Gregory didn't realize was that the entire encounter, every cruel word, every veiled threat, was being captured by a hidden camera installed just the night before by Samuel's team. And that footage would soon become the most damning evidence yet. Samuel Carter sat alone in his office long after the lights had gone out across the upper floors. The video footage from the parking garage played on a loop on his tablet. The moment Gregory Blake cornered Marissa, the way his tone twisted from condescending to outright threatening, and most of all, the way Elijah looked up at his mother, terrified and confused. That was the moment everything inside Samuel changed. This was no longer just about company ethics or quiet reforms. It had become personal. He picked up the phone and called Tiffany Jenkins. Gregory just made it easy, he said. He threatened her. In front of her child. I have it all on video. Tiffany didn't even hesitate. Then it's time to hit back. But we do it smart. No emotional explosions. Just precision. Samuel nodded. I want a plan that makes it impossible for him to recover. I want him to feel the weight of every word he thought no one would remember. The next morning, Samuel held a closed-door meeting with his top IT and security executives. He rolled out a project under the guise of a leadership integrity audit, new internal policies, upgraded surveillance, and AI-driven behavioral analytics. Everyone clapped. Gregory didn't suspect a thing. But behind the scenes, the upgrades were anything but generic. Hidden microphones were installed in common areas, meeting rooms, and yes, Gregory's favorite corner office. Samuel authorized real-time monitoring and keyword flagging on internal emails and messages. He also looped in HR Director Camille Dawson to reopen flagged complaints from the past 3 years, all involving Gregory. At the same time, Tiffany's legal team began building a timeline of Gregory's behavior across previous companies. Quiet settlements, dropped lawsuits, and racial bias claims that had been swept under the rug. Each file painted a clearer picture of a man who had used fear and power to silence others. We're not just reacting, Samuel told Tiffany during one of their strategy calls. We're exposing a pattern. And once the pattern becomes undeniable, Tiffany replied, the board will have no choice but to act. Samuel's eyes burned with purpose. For too long, people like Gregory had thrived in the shadows. Now, Samuel had turned the lights on. And the trap was almost ready to snap shut. Gregory Blake had always considered himself untouchable. In his mind, he was too valuable, too connected, too essential to fall. So when he received an invite from the Carter Enterprises communications team to speak at an upcoming internal broadcast titled Leadership in Times of Change, he barely glanced at the details before accepting. It was just another chance to hear himself talk. The live stream was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Employees across all departments, both in-office and remote, were encouraged to tune in. Samuel Carter watched from a control room 2 floors above, flanked by Tiffany Jenkins and Camille Dawson, the head of HR. The stream was live, but every second was also being recorded in high resolution. Gregory, dressed in a sharp navy suit, stepped confidently onto the set. The lights were bright. The camera red light blinked. Today, he began with a smirk, we're here to discuss leadership, accountability, and how we preserve the integrity of our culture. For the first few minutes, it was business as usual. Buzzwords, vague optimism, rehearsed charm. But then, during the Q&A segment, an anonymous employee submitted a question that had been pre-approved by Samuel's team. How does leadership ensure equity and inclusivity for employees from all backgrounds, especially those from underrepresented communities? Gregory barely blinked before answering, his tone slipping into something far less rehearsed. Well, he said, chuckling slightly, I think we need to be careful with all this diversity talk. At some point, if you keep lowering the bar just to make everyone feel included, you lose what makes a company strong. Not everyone is a fit for this level of professionalism. That's just reality. The room went silent. Across the company, jaws dropped. Screens froze on the image of a man so sure of his power, he didn't realize he'd just detonated it. In the control room, Samuel leaned forward. There it is, he whispered. Gregory kept talking, unaware that his words were turning into digital fire. Let's be honest, he continued, bringing kids into offices, giving promotions to people just to hit a quota. None of that builds excellence. It builds chaos. Samuel nodded at the technician. End the stream. The screen went black. Within minutes, the video had been clipped, downloaded, and shared to every department. By that evening, it was circulating on social media. By morning, it would be on every major business news site. And Gregory Blake? He had no idea that the fall had already begun, and there was no safety net waiting below. The Monday following the live stream felt different. It wasn't just the silence in the executive wing of Carter Enterprises or the tight-lipped tension rippling through departments. It was the sense that something long buried had finally been unearthed, and now, there was no turning back. At 10 a.m., Samuel Carter convened an emergency board meeting. He didn't enter with assumptions or emotion. He came with evidence. Tiffany Jenkins stood beside him, laptop open, as she walked the board through a 20-minute presentation that left no room for interpretation. Gregory Blake's recorded remarks from the live stream played first, unedited, raw, impossible to deny. Then came the emails. Hundreds of internal messages, flagged by the company's new AI monitoring system, showed a consistent pattern. Passive-aggressive language. Othering statements. Condescending notes directed at Black, Latino, and Asian employees. Praise withheld. Opportunities blocked. It wasn't overt discrimination, it was systemic. Camille Dawson, the HR director, stepped forward next. She presented the re-examined files of every employee who had filed a complaint against Gregory in the last 5 years. Exit interviews marked unfounded. Complaints closed without documentation. One after another, Camille laid out the names, dates, and eerily similar patterns of dismissal. Men and women who had spoken up and been ignored. Some were even shamed into silence. Then came the security footage. Marissa in the parking garage. Elijah standing beside her, confused, as Gregory loomed over them, threatening and unapologetic. It was all there. Video. Audio. Paper trails. When the presentation ended, no one spoke. Not at first. Then Samuel broke the silence. This is not about one man. This is about what we tolerated in silence. That silence ends today. The board voted unanimously to terminate Gregory Blake for cause. His access to company systems was revoked within the hour. Security was dispatched to escort him out, quietly but firmly. Later that afternoon, a company-wide statement was released. It acknowledged the failures, named the injustice, outlined steps for change. An external consulting firm was brought in to restructure the company's diversity and equity framework. A new anonymous reporting platform was launched. Most importantly, a formal apology was issued to every employee who had been made to feel invisible, voiceless, or less than. The system that had protected Gregory was gone. In its place stood a company now willing to hold itself accountable. Not because it had to, but because it finally chose to. 2 weeks after Gregory Blake was removed, the halls of Carter Enterprises felt lighter. There was no memo that told people to smile more. No announcement requiring people to greet one another in the elevators. But something had shifted. Fear had left the building, and in its place came quiet courage. Marissa Brown was called into Samuel Carter's office early one Monday morning. She arrived in her usual navy scrubs, hair tied back neatly, Elijah's backpack slung over one shoulder. Samuel stood as she entered, something he rarely did for anyone. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Marissa did, cautiously. "I owe you more than an apology," he began. "You were put in an impossible position, and you handled it with more grace than most people ever could." Marissa lowered her eyes. "I just wanted to do my job, sir." "And you did," Samuel replied. "But you did something even greater. You helped expose a culture that should never have existed here in the first place." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an offer letter, formal, detailed, and far beyond what she expected. A full-time salaried position, Director of Community Relations and Internal Culture. Health benefits. retirement matching, paid time off, and a relocation package if she ever needed it. "I want your voice at the table," he said. "Not just as a symbol, but as a strategist, as a builder." Marissa's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. "I don't have a degree," she whispered. "You have something better," Samuel said. "You have lived experience. That's what this company needs more of." As for Elijah, his life changed too. He was awarded a full scholarship to a private preparatory school just outside Atlanta. Books, meals, transportation, all included. A mentorship program was established in his name, helping children of hourly workers access better education and resources. They called it the Elijah Initiative. Marissa moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a newly developed housing complex for working families. It had a balcony. It had sunlight. It had a dishwasher, which Elijah thought was the fanciest thing in the world. But more than any of that, it had peace. They didn't just survive what happened. They changed everything because of it. 3 years can change a lot. The Carter Enterprises headquarters looked different now. Not just the new paint or the rebranded logo that emphasized unity and inclusion. It was the people, the way they spoke up, the way they listened, the way they held one another accountable. What once felt like a fortress of silence had become a place where every voice mattered. At the company's 35th anniversary celebration, rows of white chairs were arranged in the rooftop garden, sunlight pouring across the skyline of Atlanta. Employees, board members, partners, and guests filled the space, chatting over iced tea and lemon cake. And then the microphone crackled. Samuel Carter took the stage, a little grayer than before, a little more grounded. "Today," he said, "we honor our growth, not just in numbers, but in values. And to do that properly, I'd like to introduce someone who reminds us what real change looks like." He stepped aside, and out walked a 10-year-old boy in a sharp navy blazer and red sneakers, Elijah Brown. There was a soft murmur in the crowd, followed by applause. Elijah stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and began. "Hi, everyone. My name is Elijah, and I'm in 5th grade." Laughter rippled through the crowd. 3 years ago, my mom and I used to come here at night so she could clean. I would sit in the hallway with my homework and my peanut butter sandwich." He paused, glancing at the front row, where Marissa sat, tears quietly building in her eyes. "I didn't know back then that people could be scared of people like me. Or that some folks didn't want kids like me in buildings like this." He looked back to the crowd, voice steady. "But I also didn't know how many people were brave enough to stop that from happening. Mr. Carter believed in my mom. He believed in me." Elijah smiled. "Now, I want to be someone who believes in others too. I want to build companies one day where no one gets ignored just because they look different or have less." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was powerful. In that moment, Elijah wasn't just a kid with a microphone. He was the living proof that small acts of honesty can grow into movements. And that sometimes, the best speakers are the ones who speak from experience, not titles. Long after the applause faded and the rooftop lights dimmed, Samuel Carter stood at the edge of the terrace, watching the city glow beneath him. He thought about the boy who had once stacked money like puzzle pieces in the corner of his office. About the mother who carried dignity like armor, even when surrounded by cruelty. About the system he'd built. A system that had quietly allowed people like Gregory Blake to thrive while silencing the very voices that deserved to lead. He thought about how close he had come to doing nothing. Because the truth is, kindness, real kindness, is not passive. It is not enough to hope for change, or to admire those who endure. It must be defended, protected, uplifted through deliberate, often uncomfortable action. Samuel had once believed fairness was found in policies and percentages. But now he knew that fairness lives in the day-to-day choices people make when no one's watching. In calling out what's wrong, even when it costs you. In choosing to believe that someone from the margins may be the person who leads you to your greatest turning point. Kindness without action is just a feeling. But kindness backed by courage? That builds legacy. Elijah's story didn't just change a company, it rewrote the standard. His mother's integrity didn't just clear her name, it became the foundation of a new culture. And Samuel's decision to act, when silence would have been safer, became the spark that turned one quiet moment into a movement. So if you've ever doubted the power of doing the right thing, if you've ever wondered whether it's worth it to speak up, to take a stand, or to protect someone who can't protect themselves, let this story be your answer. The good people of this world? They are many. But they only win when others join them, not just in heart, but in action. If this story moved you, share it. Let it be a reminder, not just of what happened, but of what's possible. And if you want more true stories that show how compassion, courage, and conscience can reshape lives, subscribe to this channel. Because we believe in telling Black stories that matter. And sometimes, it only takes one act of decency to change everything.